The verdict came in early and quickly this afternoon. Bill Cosby guilty of all 3 counts of indecent assault on Andrea Constand, a former Temple University women's basketball administrator. Cosby reportedly stared straight ahead as the verdict was read, but after the jurors left the courtroom, he stood and started screaming profanities at the DA, who requested Cosby's bail be revoked because he's a potential flight risk. Cosby, now 80 years old, was granted bail regardless, but could face up to 30 years in prison for the crimes. And outside of court, another of the dozens of women who have accused Cosby of sexual assault and misconduct spoke out.
I feel like my faith in humanity is restored. This is a victory not just for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, not just for the victim in the case, Andrea Constand, not just for the 62 of us publicly known survivors of Bill Cosby's drug-facilitated sexual crimes against women, but it's also a victory for all sexual assault survivors, female and male. It's a victory for womanhood. When I thank the jury so much for positioning themselves on the right side of history.
Joining me to weigh in on this verdict and a few other stories in the news are Tina Opie, Assistant Professor of Management at Babson College. Tina, it's good to see you. Jen Deaderick is a local writer currently working on an illustrated history of women's citizenship. Jen, it's good to see you again, too. Is that woman right? Does the impact of this verdict extend beyond the man who it was directed at, or is it just all about Bill Cosby and the facts of this case?
I think this is a pivotal moment, I'm hoping, in history.
Why?
Because I think it does extend beyond just this particular case. I think we're establishing precedent that when women come forward, 1, we believe them, and 2, the men or women or whoever violate these individuals will be prosecuted and convicted.
You're nodding in agreement?
Yeah, I think that as a woman, I'm so used to seeing the men get away with it. You know, you get to the verdict and you're like, well, all right. And then you sort of accept it. And then this was, this is Bill Cosby. He's huge. This is a big deal.
And as we all know, there was a hung jury prior to the Me Too era.
Right.
There's a conviction relatively rapidly in the Me Too era. Is that a coincidence, or is this a function of the time, in part at least, of the time we live in?
It might be that the jury was somehow, has been in this climate, has been thinking about this stuff. Yeah, I mean, although it also seems like it seems like it was pretty conclusive though in the case. Yeah. I mean, maybe there is a way in which the juries are able to look past who he is now, and also just the time has passed. And
well, there was a big difference, too, in terms of testimony. There were the number of women who suffered similar kind of abuse from him were allowed to testify this time, unlike the first round. So is it a function of Me Too, at least in part?
I mean, I think the way that societal norms shift is that you have movements like this. So you think about the civil rights movement or the suffrage movement. This is an example of where perhaps people are beginning to question what in prior times would have been acceptable behavior. And so I'm hoping that there's been a true paradigm shift culturally so that when a woman comes forward and there's this much data, that we actually believe the data and use that. So that's what I think is different. It's not as though, because some people are going to accuse this and say the Me Too movement is causing people who are not guilty to be convicted. I think what it is finally people who have actually engaged in these behavior are having justice served.
By the way, it's a little hard to say that since there's only been one.
I know.
So, data point exactly like a groundswell.
I think it is that people also, there's a comfort level with the idea that these celebrities have done terrible things. That that it's not as much of a shock now, maybe, that someone like that could have done something so terrible.
Okay, so I'm the lawyer for Bill Cosby at the sentencing. And by the way, the judge said they may allow more women who claim to have been abused by him to testify. He's been convicted of these crimes. He's 80 years old. Judge, he's done a lot of wonderful things for this country. We all know that. A 10-year sentence or maybe a 30-year sentence is a death sentence for this man. The conviction alone has destroyed his 80 years on the planet. Judge, we'd like you to determine that he be placed on parole. What's your answer?
I think, I personally felt so betrayed by him in that he was someone who was so important to my childhood and so important to, and he spoke out so much about morality, that him acting like this, I almost feel like it's worse for him because I think a lot of people felt really betrayed.
So you're okay if he dies in jail?
Yeah.
Are you?
Yes. I mean, that sounds horrible to say, but I mean, what would have been better is if he had been caught when he was actually engaging in these behaviors and served time then, and then he might have had the opportunity to not die in jail. But the unfortunate thing is, or the good thing for him is he did have a chance to live 80 years or 50 years past when this happened. He didn't have to. It didn't have to be that way.
It's not all good news today on this front, I should say. And I want to revisit a topic I did with you two about a month ago.
Yeah.
We woke up to a story on page 6 of the New York Post suggesting, and there's some debate whether it's initiated by Charlie Rose or just about Charlie Rose, who obviously we all know lost his job at PBS, an abuser and a groper and an exposer as well. Allegedly, somebody or he is pitching a show to Netflix about Me Too with Me Too guests. And this comes on the heels. We met when Mario Batali wanted back in. Matt Lauer is now saying, I want back in. He is not quite literally, but I essentially want to atone for my sins, etc. What you said to me last time was something like, it's been 3 months.
Right.
What's your reaction, particularly to the Rose thing, and the fact that there is a growing number of these men who've been exiled in Me Too land who are saying, I want back in?
I feel the same. Like, what? We don't, it's time. We can move on. I get that they want to be back in the public eye. And it's weird when you're used to being, I think must be very strange to have been someone who was very well known, who was, very famous, and you were on TV all the time, and then suddenly you're not. And they think, well, I should be on TV, or I should be. But you don't get, I think it's done. You're done.
Yeah.
You're done.
What do you think when you heard about the show, by the way?
I was disgusted. I literally got a sick feeling in my stomach. I'm like, this pervert. I'm sorry, Charlie, I don't know you, but if what they said is correct, for me, the issue is you need to be in a clinic getting some assistance. I mean, you're fortunate that you're not in prison. And you have the audacity, whether he pitched it or else wants to do it, to pitch a show.
By the way, if he gets this, OJ's going to get a show where former murderers who got acquitted.
That's right.
But, is it fair to say, I think we touched on this last time too, that at some point, I know not now, so we're not going to belabor this, at some point, the severity of the offense is relevant? I know Matt Damon got in trouble for saying this, but that is relevant, just not yet.
Well, it is.
There's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of behavior, and we've talked about Aziz Ansari on your show, and then you have, Matt Lauer or Mario Batali or whoever. I mean, there are different degrees, and I do think that the Me Too movement is sort of reconciling that fact.
But you said it earlier, there's been one conviction.
Yes.
Right?
Can we move to another kind of abuse of the distribution of controlled substances?
Yeah.
Everybody now knows about Dr. Ronny Jackson, a personal physician to not just this president, but Obama and Bush the younger.
The Candyman.
And the Candyman, as he's now
Spaceman.
called. He's withdrawn his nomination.
Yeah.
Here is Senator Tester, who's the ranking Democrat on the key committee here, talking to Anderson Cooper about the allegations against Jackson. Here he is.
The reports we got from the people, the 20-some people who got a hold of us and said, we've got a problem, this doctor has a problem, because he hands out prescriptions like candy. In fact, in the White House, they call him the Candyman.
Now, most of the reaction to this has been, this is a disgrace, an outrage, it shouldn't have been not, why wasn't he vetted, etc. Chuck Todd from Meet the Press on the radio with us today had a totally different reaction. Here's Chuck.
I have to say I was a bit taken aback at how cavalier and how comfortable the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee and Tester's staff was of just putting these things out there in the public domain, whether they'd been verified or not.
I have to say, I hadn't thought of that, and when I did think of it, I was embarrassed. I mean, 23 people allegedly came forward, according to Senator Tester and others, said some things that are borderline criminal in my offense, but they are unverified. The guy has not had it. Of course, he didn't have to drop out, but it's now out in the public sphere, and he's getting, tried. Does Chuck Todd have a point?
I think he does have a point. I mean, in journalism, in academics, we triangulate, and we have multiple data sources to verify the information. And I actually want to connect that back to the earlier discussion about the Me Too movement and some of the criticism it's received, which is where people are sort of concerned that people are being tried in the court of public opinion. Court of public opinion. And I think that there is veracity that should be a concern.
And often if you defend yourself, you dig a deeper hole for yourself.
You look more guilty when, thou dost protesteth too much.
Does Chuck have a point vis-a-vis Dr. Jackson here?
He does. I mean, I think it's not unprecedented. I mean, we had was it? I can't remember if it was Kimber Woods or Lonnie Guernier. With the not paying taxes on the net.
Yeah, Lonnie Guernier. Okay.
And all, so we've had that happen before, where someone dropped out because there were allegations of some kind. But it does seem. I mean, I feel like all of Washington is sort of this crazy free for all right now.
Yeah.
And we have the current president, who just is nominated. I can imagine people in the White House were saying, "Don't nominate this guy." I mean, it's just
it feels like a feeding frenzy.
Yeah, it's a crazy
time.
I
think we want good people to get into politics, but if things like this continue, and I'm not saying that Ronny Jackson should have stayed in there.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, but I just think it's not the way that I would like to see our political system
run. He shouldn't have been nominated. I mean, that's the crazy thing is, everyone must have known this about him. It was one of those things that was a known.
Well, there's a question also unanswered, as I said to Chuck Todd. Did someone in the Obama administration not know about this? We got to go. And by the way, before you badmouth the president, Kanye says they share dragon energy.
Kanye has mental health issues.
It's a big
we'll
win
talk
for
about
Taylor
that next
Swift.
time. Tina, thanks, Jen. It's great to see you.